rights movements are pretty docile, especially in comparison to the rights of man movements. But I'm wondering what it is that you think it is about, like the global quality or whatever, that leads to such vehement avoidance of violence and revolution. Why? I agree that it's the case, but I just don't quite understand what has led to that.
It's an extremely interesting question. Somehow our forebears were much more tolerant of getting rowdy in defense of rights, the rights of man, and they're to be pursued in the form of human rights today. Some other set of techniques is necessary. So we would have to think, I guess, in two ways. One, looking at changing views of the old ways, and one, second, the discovery of the new techniques and why they achieved their hegemony. I suppose I'd say on the one end that one hypothesis you might entertain is that war got worse and worse. So I don't want to endorse a technological explanation, but it seems hard to think of a revolutionary movement today as something that could have the relatively clean success it did in the American case. I mean, speaking against that hypothesis, though, is the obvious fact that things were pretty bloody back then in the French Revolution, most of all. Now, it's true that those events precisely, not the American ones, which say Edmund Burke supported, but the French ones sparked the invention of conservatism and counter-revolution. And so they were impressive enough back then to be noted. I guess I don't have a good answer about whether the escalation of violence would be the thing that makes the tool of sovereignty, the fight to achieve it, seem unworkable. On the new end, I think we see the creation of tools that hadn't existed before. I mean, some people do emphasize that lots of the tools and techniques that are later going to be developed for, say, quote-unquote, naming and shaming in the human rights movement today were pioneered in anti-slavery activism, even if they didn't invent rights and they were mostly religious and so forth. But even if that's the case, it seems as if, again, technologically speaking, the tools at our disposal to document, name, and shame seem much more potent in the world after World War II than ever before. I don't know. So my basic answer is I don't know. Does anyone have an idea? I'm trying to compare these two, and as a historian, make sure we see them not just as a kind of, upward curve, but as a succession or even displacement of projects. But the explanatory problem is much harder. I agree with that. I mean, one kind of low-minded hypothesis I've given at the end of the paper is that sovereignty became, worrisome when the wrong people got it. I mean, that seems to be the answer. Now, how we would then explain that switch, aside from the most low-minded kind of hypotheses, I don't know. David and then Ms. Martin.
Yeah, I guess, going back to the very concept of cosmos, which is a kind of a paradoxical concept to begin with, because
Yes.
the notion that the polis, which is an enclosure, is a political entity, has
Yes.
violence as an instrument, and
Yes.
then you extend into the notion of a cosmos where there isn't, it is meant not to be accounted for.
Right.
So we start out, so I'm really thinking about how political the concept of human rights can be, whether
Right.
you can really separate the political from instruments of coercion, of violence, legitimate, illegitimate, what have you,
Right.
and whether a concept in the absence of, a legalization, which then involves criminal courts, and then you say, who's the enforcement mechanism?
Right.
So it seems to me that there's implicit here more claim for the human rights concept I see in a world where people are keeping their weapons in hand,
Yes,
states
yeah.
function,
Right.
sovereign, whatever
Right.
they're naming and shaming really isn't changing much in Nigeria or
Right,
in
right.
the United States. I mean, so I wonder whether there isn't in the formulation of the problem a kind of a built-in exaggeration of the human rights claim by matching it against this other, which had this articulation in terms of the state system, which hasn't gone anywhere.
And that seems mostly reasonable. I mean, I hesitate to, interpret Hannah Arendt and Rogers here.
Oh, you must,
Expertise,
that's why we bring people in from the outside.
You might take her basic claim in her famous essay, which is later incorporated in her book, to be warning those who want to propound human rights not to do so unless they're prepared to set up a citizenship space of inclusion. Now, of course, she hated the concept of sovereignty, but she did claim that the crucial question was whether such a citizenship space was going to exist to include the people to whom we would assign the right. Now, the Stoics weren't even trying to do such a thing, and that's your crucial point, which is that it's a kind of, spiritual or moral claim, which might have relevance for our individual psychic reform, but it's not at all a project of world reform or political transformation. I mean, some of the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, were very important political people. I mean, he was the emperor, but there's really nothing like a political project of cosmopolitan reform that flowed from it. And that's why I'm extremely skeptical of this common view in liberal thought that there's some kind of lineage in the Stoics and even Kant for contemporary human rights. Now, in the defense of human rights, they're aware of what you call the problem of enforcement, or what we might call the need to create some citizenship space. They may not have been as aware of that when Hannah Arendt wrote, but at this stage of the game, you may be right in your skepticism. One of the interesting things which would complicate my narrative is that in between the 70s, when there's this big upsurge in human rights advocacy in our time, one of the major events in the history of human rights is really the